The Council's desperate hour. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Federation fell silent as the emergency alerts flashed across every screen. Supreme Commander Velar, a tall Arcturian with silver-scaled skin, stood at the central podium, his forearms gripping the edges as he surveyed the representatives of 300 civilizations. "The Void Swarm has destroyed another system," he announced, his voice echoing across the vast chamber. "Proxima Centauri and its colonies are gone. 7 billion lives extinguished in less than a solar day." Horrified murmurs rippled through the assembly. On the massive holographic display behind Velar, footage showed enormous insectoid ships tearing through the Federation's most advanced defensive line as if it were paper. "Our most sophisticated weaponry fails against them," continued Velar. "They adapt to each tactic within hours. They learn our patterns and use them against us. In the 3 months since they emerged from the galactic core, we have lost 17 systems and nearly 30 billion lives." Ambassador T. Lara of the Venlox Confederation, her translucent skin glowing with bioluminescent patterns of distress, rose from her seat. "What of the Praetorian fleet? Surely our greatest warships." "Destroyed," interrupted Velar. "The Void Swarm adapted to their shield frequencies and energy signatures. The Praetorians fought with honor and perfect tactical precision, and they were annihilated for it." The chamber erupted in panicked voices. The Federation had existed for 12,000 years, bringing peace and technological advancement to the galaxy. War had become a distant memory, something studied in historical archives rather than experienced. Their military forces were designed for ceremonial displays and minor peacekeeping operations, not existential combat. In the midst of the chaos, a small figure stood quietly at the back of the chamber. Dr. Eliza Chen, Earth's representative to the Federation, was human, a species only recently admitted to the galactic community after centuries of probation. At 67, her silver-streaked black hair and weathered face bore the marks of a life spent in scientific pursuit rather than politics. "Perhaps," she said, her voice barely audible above the din, "we've been fighting the wrong way." The chamber's advanced acoustics captured her words and amplified them. Conversations died away as heads turned toward the human representative. "Explain yourself, Dr. Chen," demanded Velar, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. Chen walked slowly to the center of the chamber, her slight limp a reminder of an old injury. "The Federation fights with precision, with patterns, with predictability," she said. "You've spent millennia perfecting the art of civilized warfare, coordinated formations, ethical engagement protocols, mathematical battle sequences." "Of course," replied Ambassador Ziv of the Tauran Alliance, his crystalline form shimmering with indignation. "That is how advanced civilizations conduct themselves in conflict. Would you suggest barbarism instead?" Chen smiled slightly. "I would suggest survival instead. The Void Swarm defeats you because it learns your patterns faster than you can create new ones. It anticipates your every move because your moves follow logical progressions. And humans fight differently?" asked Velar, skepticism evident in his tone. "We did," Chen said quietly. "Before we joined the Federation, before we embraced your ways of peace and order, humanity fought wars unlike anything your species can imagine. Not because we were stronger or more advanced. We weren't. But because we were unpredictable, adaptable, and willing to break every rule when survival demanded it." "Are you suggesting we resurrect the very traits that nearly kept humanity out of the Federation?" asked Tilara, her voice dripping with concern. "I'm suggesting," said Chen firmly, "that we need warriors who think differently than the Federation. Warriors whose tactics the Void Swarm has never encountered and cannot predict." Velar's expression darkened. Earth's current military forces have been trained in Federation doctrines for generations. They fight as we do now. "I'm not talking about our current military," replied Chen. "I'm talking about those who fought in our last wars, before Federation membership, the veterans, the survivors. They would began Ambassador Ziv. "Old," finished Chen. Yes, the youngest veterans of what we call the final conflicts would be in their 70s now, but they remember how to fight wars that make no sense, how to survive when the odds are impossible. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Supreme Commander Veller stepped closer to Chen, lowering his voice. You're proposing we entrust the fate of the galaxy to elderly humans. Their bodies are frail, their reflexes slowed by age. Chen met his gaze unflinchingly. Their bodies, perhaps. Their minds are anything but. And in this war, Commander, it is not physical strength we need, but the kind of thinking that turns certain defeat into victory. The kind of thinking your civilization has forgotten, but ours remembers in its bones. After hours of heated debate, the Council made its decision. A delegation would be sent to Earth to recruit these veterans, these relics of humanity's violent past. Not out of belief in Chen's theory, but out of desperation. The Void Swarm was approaching the Federation's core worlds. Within weeks, trillions more would die if nothing changed. As the Council session ended, Ambassador T. Lara approached Chen privately. Do you truly believe these aged warriors can succeed where our mightiest fleets have failed? She asked. Chen watched the continuing footage of the Void Swarm's advance on the screens above. The Federation fights wars like a chess match. Elegant, rule-bound, predictable, she said softly. Humans fight wars like a bar brawl. Dirty, desperate, and with no move too unthinkable if it means surviving another day. She turned to the Venlock's ambassador, her eyes reflecting the flames of distant worlds burning on the screens. The galaxy needs to remember why humanity was feared before we were welcomed. And the Void Swarm needs to learn what we've always known, that sometimes survival requires becoming the monster your enemy doesn't expect. The Forgotten Warriors. The delegation arrived on Earth at a small, unremarkable building on the outskirts of New Singapore. The place looked nothing like a military facility, more like a community center for the elderly, with its garden paths and quiet communal spaces. Supreme Commander Veller fought to hide his disappointment as Dr. Chen led them through the entrance. "This is where your great warriors spend their time?" he asked, watching as elderly humans played board games and tended to plants in the atrium. "Some of them," Chen replied. "Others live in similar facilities around the world. We call them retirement communities, places where those who've finished their working lives can live in peace." Ambassador T-Lara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to express confusion. "These frail creatures fought in your final conflicts, the wars that left half your planet uninhabitable for decades." Before Chen could respond, a gravelly voice cut through the conversation. "Frail, are we?" The delegates turned to see an elderly man approaching, leaning heavily on a cane. His weathered face bore a network of scars, and his right hand was clearly prosthetic, an older model, not the seamless synthetic limbs common in the Federation. "General Marcus Santos," Chen said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Santos eyed the alien delegates with an intensity that made even Veller uncomfortable. "So these are the advanced civilizations that can't handle a few bugs from the core," he said, his tone dismissive. "Figured it would come to this eventually." General Santos commanded Earth's combined defense forces during the autonomous machine uprising. Chen explained to the delegates. He led the human resistance against an enemy that outthought us at every turn. "Until we stopped trying to outthink them and started fighting dirty," Santos added, motioning for them to follow him deeper into the facility. "That's why you're here, isn't it? The pretty patterns of your warfare aren't working anymore." The aliens exchanged uncomfortable glances as they followed Santos through corridors where more elderly humans nodded in recognition at the general. They entered a large meeting room where a dozen more seniors waited, their ages ranging from early 70s to well over 90. Despite their years, each sat with military posture, eyes alert and evaluating the newcomers. "My war council," Santos said with a hint of amusement, "or what's left of it." An elderly woman with close-cropped white hair stood up. Her dark skin contrasted with a jagged scar that ran from her right eye down to her jaw. "Admiral Sophia Jackson." She introduced herself. Former commander of the North Atlantic Naval Coalition during the Climate Wars. One by one, the others introduced themselves. Veterans of conflicts the Federation delegates had only read about in Earth's admission files. Colonel Warzone of the Asian Alliance Special Forces. Commander Imani Okafor, who had led guerrilla operations in the reclamation of the African deadlands. Dr. Samuel Goldstein, whose controversial bioweapons had ultimately ended the final conflict. I shown them the Void Swarm footage, Chen told the assembled veterans. They understand what we're facing. Santos nodded and activated a holographic display in the center of the table. Your Federation forces fight like you've designed warfare in a laboratory, he said, showing clips of the failed engagements against the swarm. Beautiful formations, perfect coordination, textbook maneuvers. Admiral Jackson snorted. Textbooks. That's your first problem. The enemy reads your textbook after the first engagement. Then they write a better one. Our tactical AI systems calculate optimal approaches based on thousands of years of military theory, protested Wheeler. Theory, repeated Colonel Jung, the word dripping with disdain. Theory works until you face something that doesn't play by the rules. Your enemy adapts faster than your AI can calculate new approaches because your approaches still follow logical patterns. Commander Okafor leaned forward, her artificial eyes glowing faintly. In the climate wars, we faced enemies with superior technology, superior numbers, and control of vital resources. We should have lost. By every military theory, we should have been wiped out. So how did you win? Asked Tilera. We stopped fighting logically, Okafor said simply. We made moves that made no sense, sacrificed positions that seemed vital, abandoned strategies mid-execution only to circle back days later when the enemy had adapted to our absence. Dr. Goldstein, his hands trembling slightly with age, added, the Federation fights wars like scientists. Hypothesis, experiment, observation, refinement. Humans fight wars like survivors, desperate, adaptable, and willing to throw away the rulebook when necessary. Weller's skepticism was evident. And you believe your unconventional approaches would work against the Void Swarm, an enemy that has destroyed our most powerful fleets. We don't know, Santos admitted, surprising the delegates, but we know your way isn't working. And unlike you, we don't have the luxury of fighting pretty wars anymore, haven't for a long time. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Wheeler. Santos exchanged glances with his fellow veterans before answering. Give us 5 ships. Crew them with volunteers. Young soldiers willing to learn old ways of fighting. Let us take the battle to the swarm our way. 5 ships against an armada that has destroyed entire fleets. Tilera's bioluminescence flashed in patterns of disbelief. 5 ships crewed by people who fight like cornered animals, not like chess masters, Santos replied. 5 ships operating without your predictable patterns and perfect formations. The room fell silent as the Federation delegates considered the proposal. It seemed absurd on its face, entrusting their defense to elderly humans using outdated barbaric tactics, and yet their civilized approaches had failed utterly against the Void Swarm. There's something else you should know, said Admiral Jackson, breaking the silence. Something about the Void Swarm that your analysts have missed. She manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on footage of the swarm ships. We've been studying these attacks. The swarm isn't just adapting to your tactics, it's learning from them, evolving. But its evolution follows patterns too, patterns your scientists haven't recognized because they don't think like predators. What patterns? Asked Wheeler. They're not just destroying, said Jackson. They're testing, experimenting, learning your responses before launching their real campaign. These aren't random attacks, they're reconnaissance in force. The delegates exchanged alarmed glances as Jackson continued. Your Federation hasn't seen real war in millennia. You've forgotten what it looks like when an enemy is preparing for total conquest. We haven't. General Santos stood, leaning on his cane but somehow appearing taller than before. The question isn't whether our old ways will work against the Void Swarm. The question is whether your civilization can afford to ignore any possibility of survival, no matter how distasteful it finds our methods. As the Federation delegates looked at the aged faces around them, scarred, weathered, but alive with a fierce intelligence born of survival, they realized they had run out of alternatives. These weren't the refined warriors of Federation doctrine, fighting with honor and precision. These were survivors of apocalypse, people who had faced extinction and refused to accept it. "Very well," said Veller finally. "You will have your 5 ships, but you will also have Federation observers monitoring your methods." Santos smiled, a cold expression that reminded the aliens why humanity had once been feared across the stars. "Fair enough. Your observers can watch. They might even learn something." As they left the meeting room, Lara pulled Chen aside. "These veterans, can they physically handle combat operations?" Their bodies are old," Chen acknowledged. "But war isn't fought with bodies alone. It's fought with minds. And their minds remember what the galaxy has forgotten. The sheer stubborn refusal to die that is humanity's greatest weapon." Unorthodox preparations. The 5 ships provided by the Federation were not impressive. Old cruisers, outdated by current standards, pulled from the reserves of the Galactic Defense Fleet. They arrived in Earth orbit with minimum crews, volunteers and conscripts who had been told they were participating in a special training exercise. When General Santos and his fellow veterans boarded the flagship, renamed Thermopylae, the young alien crew members stared in poorly concealed shock. They had expected human warriors, not elderly individuals who moved slowly, used mobility aids, and needed medication. "They're looking at us like we're already dead," muttered Admiral Jackson as she settled into the command chair, her joints creaking audibly. "Good," replied Santos. "Underestimation is an advantage we'll use." Zilith, the Federation observer assigned to the Thermopylae, watched with growing concern as the veterans began making changes to the ship. Commander Okafor ordered the removal of nearly half the predictive combat systems, replacing them with what she called human intuition protocols. "This violates 17 fleet regulations," Zilith protested, her tentacled appendages waving in agitation. "These systems are essential for coordinated combat operations." "These systems," Okafor replied without looking up from her work, "create predictable response patterns that the Void Swarm can learn from. We're removing the predictability." Colonel Zhang supervised as engineering teams reconfigured the ship's power distribution systems, deliberately introducing what seemed like inefficiencies and redundancies. When questioned, he simply said, "Perfectly optimized systems fail perfectly. Imperfect ones survive." Dr. Goldstein took over one of the science labs, turning it into what he called a chaos engineering center. The elderly scientist worked with young Federation xenobiologists, teaching them to think about the Void Swarm not as an enemy to be defeated through superior firepower, but as a complex system to be disrupted through targeted anomalies. "The swarm adapts to patterns," he explained to confused alien scientists. "So we will become the absence of pattern. We will be the noise in their signal, the static in their evolutionary algorithm." Meanwhile, General Santos personally trained the bridge crew. The training shocked the young officers. Instead of focusing on procedures and protocols, Santos emphasized improvisation and unpredictability. "Forget everything you've learned about optimal response times," he told them. "Sometimes the best move is to wait when action is expected. Sometimes it's to act when patience is anticipated. Sometimes it's to fail deliberately to set up a future success." A young Tauran navigation officer raised a crystalline limb. "But our tactical matrices calculate the optimal." "Turn off your matrices," Santos interrupted. "They're thinking for you. And they're thinking in ways the enemy can predict. From now on, you think for yourselves." After a week of preparations, Supreme Commander Veller arrived for an inspection. What he found horrified him. The ships had been modified beyond recognition, their systems reconfigured in ways that defied Federation military doctrine. The crews had abandoned the precise coordination protocols that were the backbone of galactic defense strategy. "This is not what we agreed to," Veller said angrily to Santos in the Thermopila's modified command center. "You've corrupted these ships and crews with obsolete human warfare concepts." Santos didn't seem bothered by the accusation. "You gave us 5 ships to fight our way. This is our way. These modifications reduce combat efficiency by at least 30% according to our models," argued Veller, pointing to the diagnostic displays. "Your models are the problem," replied Admiral Jackson, entering the command center with a slight limp. "Your models assume warfare is an equation to be solved. It isn't. It's chaos to be embraced." Veller's 4 arms crossed in frustration. "The Council will not approve deployment of these vessels in their current state. They don't even maintain proper formation in basic movement drills." "Formation is predictable," Santos said simply. "We don't do predictable anymore." As the argument continued, an emergency alert sounded. The Void Swarm had been detected approaching the Arcturus system, a major Federation population center with over 20 billion inhabitants spread across 7 planets. "The defense fleet is moving to intercept," reported a communications officer. "Standard Defense Protocol Omega-7 is being implemented." Santos and Jackson exchanged knowing glances, "and the swarm will have adapted to Omega-7 before the fleet even arrives," said Jackson. "Just like they adapted to protocols Alpha through Omega-6. Santos turned to Veller. "You can debate our methods while another system falls, or you can let us deploy now and show you a different way to fight." Faced with the imminent threat and out of options, Veller reluctantly authorized the deployment of the human-led squadron. As the 5 modified ships prepared to jump to the Arcturus system, Santos addressed the crews. "You've spent a week learning to unlearn everything you thought you knew about warfare," he said, his voice carrying to all 5 vessels. "Now it's time to put those lessons into practice. You won't fight like a Federation fleet because you aren't one anymore. You're something the Void Swarm has never seen before, a human wolf pack." As the ships accelerated into jump space, Dr. Chen stood beside Veller on the Federation command vessel watching them depart. "Do they truly have a chance?" asked Veller quietly. "In 12,000 years of peace," Chen replied, "the Federation has forgotten something crucial about war, something humans never could afford to forget." "And what is that?" "That victory doesn't always go to the strongest or most advanced. Sometimes it goes to those willing to do what the enemy considers unthinkable." The human squadron arrived at Arcturus to find the situation already desperate. The Void Swarm had bypassed the outer system defenses entirely, somehow anticipating the exact deployment pattern of the Federation defense fleet. Now the massive insectoid ships were approaching the heavily populated inner planets, while the defense fleet struggled to regroup. From the command chair of the Thermopylae, General Santos observed the unfolding disaster with grim recognition. "Look at that," he said to Admiral Jackson. "The defense fleet is executing a perfect retreat and redeployment maneuver. Textbook perfect. And the swarm is countering with a perfect response," added Jackson. "They've seen this dance before." Santos activated the squadron comm. "All ships, this is General Santos. Implement Chaos Protocol 1. I repeat, Chaos Protocol 1. The 5 human-led ships suddenly broke from their approach vector, each accelerating in seemingly random directions. To Federation observers, it appeared as though the squadron had lost all cohesion, each vessel acting independently without coordination. Zilith, the Federation observer, approached Santos in alarm. "What are you doing? Your squadron is dispersing. You're throwing away any chance of concentrated firepower." Santos didn't take his eyes off the tactical display. "We're not dispersing," he said quietly. "We're becoming unpredictable." As the battle unfolded, the Federation forces continued to fight according to their doctrines. Precise, coordinated, and utterly predictable to an enemy that had already destroyed 17 star systems. Ship after ship fell to the Void Swarm's attacks, their perfect formations becoming perfect targets. Meanwhile, The 5 ships under human command moved in patterns that defied conventional military logic. They attacked from unexpected vectors, retreated when pursuit seemed certain, and occasionally appeared to malfunction or make critical errors, only to reveal these as deliberate feints that lured swarm vessels into vulnerable positions. "This isn't warfare," Zilith said in shock as she watched the Thermopylae deliberately vent plasma from its engines, appearing damaged, only to suddenly reverse thrust and fire on the swarm vessels that moved to finish it off. "This is madness." "No," replied Colonel Zhang from his tactical station. "This is survival. The difference between how prey fights and how predators fight. The Federation forgot how to be predators. We never had that luxury." The first victory. The battle for the Arcturus system raged for 12 hours. Federation command vessels transmitted constant orders for the human squadron to conform to the larger fleet's tactical patterns, orders that General Santos cheerfully acknowledged and then ignored. As the main defense fleet continued to suffer devastating losses, the 5 ships under human command began to show surprising results. The Thermopylae, under Santos' direct command, appeared to deliberately expose its flank to avoid swarm cruiser, drawing the enemy into an attack position. Federation observers watched in horror, certain they were about to witness the destruction of the human flagship. "Pull back," demanded Zilith, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "You're presenting them with your most vulnerable aspect." "Only if they expect us to fight like you do," replied Santos calmly. As the swarm vessel moved to deliver what should have been a killing blow, the Thermopylae suddenly executed a maneuver that Federation naval architects had specifically designed out of modern ships, an emergency power reversal that strained the structural integrity to its limits, but allowed the ship to pivot at an impossible angle. The swarm vessel, committed to its attack run against where the Thermopylae should have been, found itself exposed to a full broadside from the human vessel. The Thermopylae's weapons, reconfigured by Dr. Goldstein's team to fire in deliberately irregular patterns, tore through the swarm ship's adaptive shields. "Direct hit," reported a young Venlock's weapons officer, surprise evident in her voice. Santos nodded without emotion. They adapted to predictable energy signatures and firing patterns. We gave them neither. Across the system, the other 4 ships in the human squadron were employing equally unorthodox tactics. Admiral Jackson's vessel, the Stalingrad, appeared to be running from 2 swarm pursuers, leading them into what seemed a tactical dead end near one of Arcturus's moons. Federation commanders sent urgent warnings that she was making a critical error. Jackson silenced the incoming communications and addressed her young crew. "They think we're trapped," she said, a grim smile on her weathered face. "They've forgotten that sometimes being trapped is exactly where you need to be." As the swarm vessels closed in for the kill, the Stalingrad suddenly cut all power emissions, appearing to suffer catastrophic systems failure. The swarm ships, sensing easy prey, moved closer, exactly as Jackson had anticipated. "Now," she ordered. The Stalingrad suddenly unleashed its full weapons capacity, not at the pursuing swarm vessels, but at the moon's surface directly beneath them. The barrage triggered a massive plume of debris that engulfed the swarm ships, their shields calibrated for energy weapons rather than kinetic impacts. Before they could adapt, the Stalingrad powered up again and finished them off with precision strikes to their now exposed sensor arrays. Meanwhile, Commander Okafor's vessel, the Mau Mau, employed tactics drawn from Earth's guerrilla warfare history. The ship used Arcturus's dense asteroid field not just as cover, but as a weapon, planting improvised explosive devices on asteroids and then herding swarm vessels into the killed zones with false energy signatures. "They learned patterns," Okafor explained to her stunned crew. "So we never establish any. Our unpredictability is our greatest weapon." Colonel Zhang's ship, the Dragon's Teeth, demonstrated the ancient Earth concept of sacrificial gambits. It deliberately sacrificed secondary systems and even portions of its hull to lure swarm attackers into positions of vulnerability, accepting damage that would have been unthinkable under Federation doctrine. "Your ship is falling apart," protested a Federation tactical advisor over the comm. "A ship is not alive," John replied calmly as another section of hull was ejected, taking with it a swarm boarding party that had thought they'd successfully penetrated the vessel. "Its only purpose is to serve its mission. Sometimes that means sacrificing parts to preserve the whole." Dr. Goldstein's vessel, the Oppenheimer, employed perhaps the most unconventional approach of all. The elderly scientist had reconfigured the ship's communications array to broadcast what he called cognitive dissonance patterns, signals specifically designed to interfere with the swarm's adaptive algorithms. "They learn by recognizing patterns," he explained to his skeptical crew. "So we're giving them anti-patterns, information that actively disrupts their ability to form predictive models." Remarkably, swarm vessels that stayed too long in the Oppenheimer's broadcast radius began to show signs of confusion, their normally coordinated movements becoming erratic and their responses to attacks growing slower. 6 hours into the battle, Federation High Command noticed a startling development. The Void Swarm, which had been systematically destroying the main defense fleet, had diverted a disproportionate number of vessels to deal with the 5 human-led ships. Despite representing less than 2% of the Federation forces in the system, the human squadron was drawing nearly 40% of the swarm's attention. "They recognized the threat," Santos observed when this information reached the Thermopylae. "Not because we're more powerful, but because we're the one thing they can't predict." Admiral Jackson nodded in agreement. "They can anticipate the defense fleet's every move because those moves follow logical progressions. But us?" She smiled, the scar on her face stretching. "We're fighting like our ancestors did, like cornered animals with nothing to lose." By the 10th hour, something unprecedented had occurred. The Void Swarm's attack pattern began to fragment. Individual swarm vessels continued to fight effectively, but their legendary coordination was breaking down. Some vessels remained focused on the main Federation fleet, while others seemed almost obsessed with destroying the human squadron, often at the expense of more strategically valuable targets. "It's working," Dr. Goldstein reported from the Oppenheimer. "They're experiencing strategic confusion. Their adaptive algorithms can't form a coherent response to our methods because our methods defy algorithmic prediction." In the 12th hour, the unthinkable happened. The Void Swarm began to retreat, not in the orderly, tactical withdrawal that might have been expected, but in disarray, individual vessels sometimes even impeding each other's escape vectors. On the Federation command vessel, Supreme Commander Valor watched in disbelief as the swarm departed the Arcturus system, leaving behind dozens of destroyed or damaged swarm ships, more losses than they had suffered in all previous engagements combined. "Impossible," he whispered, his 4 arms hanging limp at his sides. 5 obsolete ships crewed by elderly humans and inexperienced volunteers. Dr. Chen stood beside him, her expression sombered despite the victory. "Not impossible, just forgotten. This is how humanity fought before we joined the Federation, before we embraced your ways of orderly warfare. This is how we survived when all logic said we should perish." As the human squadron regrouped, their ships bearing scars that would have been considered unacceptable under Federation military doctrine, Santos addressed the combined crews. "Today you learned the first lesson of human warfare," he said, his voice carrying to all 5 vessels. "Not how to follow orders or execute perfect maneuvers, but how to embrace chaos as an ally." The Void Swarm expected an enemy that fights according to logical rules. Instead, they found humans. In the aftermath, as Federation medical ships arrived to treat the wounded and engineering vessels began repairs, news of the victory spread throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the Void Swarm had emerged from the galactic core, a Federation force had not just survived an engagement, but driven the enemy back. The Federation Council called an emergency session. The debate was heated, with many representatives expressing horror at the tactics employed by the human squadron. They had violated dozens of military protocols, ignored direct orders from superior officers, and employed methods that many considered barbaric. They deliberately sacrificed portions of their own vessels, protested the Tauran representative. They exposed their crews to unnecessary risks. They used moons and asteroids as weapons. And they saved 20 billion lives, countered Dr. Chen quietly, when your perfect formations and precise tactics had failed. After hours of debate, the Council reached a reluctant conclusion. The human squadron would be expanded. General Santos and his fellow veterans would be given authority to train more crews in their unorthodox methods. The defense fleet would still operate according to Federation doctrine, but the human forces would be allowed to continue fighting their way. As Santos received this news aboard the battered Thermopylae, he shared a knowing look with Admiral Jackson. "They still don't understand," he said quietly. "They think we won because of tactics or luck." Jackson nodded, wincing slightly as a medical officer treated a burn on her arm, an injury she'd sustained when she'd insisted on personally helping repair crew members extinguish a fire in engineering rather than evacuate as protocol demanded. "They won't understand until they accept what we've always known," she replied. "That war isn't won by the side with the best technology or the most elegant tactics. It's won by the side willing to do whatever it takes to survive," finished Santos. And humanity has had more practice at that than any species in the galaxy. As repair crews worked to make the Thermopylae battle-ready again, Santos studied the latest intelligence reports on void swarm movements. The enemy was regrouping, likely already adapting to the lessons of Arcturus. But for the first time, they had encountered something they couldn't simply analyze and counter: the unpredictable, the logical, sometimes seemingly self-destructive, but ultimately effective methods of human warfare. "They'll be back," Santos told his crew, "and they'll be smarter than before. But so will we, because that's the second lesson of human warfare. We learn from the enemy faster than they learn from us, not because we're smarter, but because we've been fighting for survival since before we walked upright." The young alien crew members, who had been skeptical of these elderly human commanders just days ago, now listened with rapt attention. They had witnessed something their civilizations had forgotten over millennia of peace: the raw, primal effectiveness of warfare stripped of protocol and precision, reduced to its most essential element: the will to survive at any cost. "Get some rest," Santos told them. "Tomorrow, we start training for the next battle. And this time, we'll be even less predictable."